Alright guys, welcome back. Let's go through a practice problem together. Write a worksheet change event in this sheet, worksheet event. Okay, so I have a worksheet that is named worksheet event as a tab name that is triggered with the message you are at the desired selection when cell A18 to D20, F30 to G32, H15 and H18 is changed. Okay, so these are non-continuous cell range. Okay, so basically the cells that are highlighted in blue, right? A18 to D20, F30 to G32, okay, and H15 as well as H18, right? So whenever there is a change in any of the cells here that's highlighted in blue, it should return as a message you are the desired selection. Okay. Use the target.address method and not intersect method. Okay. They're both methods that we have discussed earlier. Ensure the event is not triggered by the deletion of cells and highlighting, etc. Okay. So if you're deleting cells or whatever it is, right? It's not going to trigger the macro. Okay. So let's get on to it and see how we can approach this problem, right? So the first thing is I want to insert a module, right? Because I want to account for the return, right? Where we say you're at the desired selection, right? So I'm just going to say message box, you are at the, what was it? You are at the desired selection, right? You are at the desired selection, right? So as I've said, that all my code statements have to be called from the procedure. Okay, I don't like to write my code statements in the worksheet or workbook events, right? And that's just how I do it. And what was the event that we were supposed to use? The worksheet change event, right? So the difference between selection change and change is selection change is when you are shifting from one cell to another cell, right? So if you're just moving from one cell to another cell, that's the selection change. Change is basically when you are making some entries or removing entries from the cell. Okay, that is the change, right? Whenever you are whenever you are tampering with the values in the cell, that is considered change. Okay, so I'll just write the range here so as to ensure that I don't have to come back and forth. A18 to D20, F30 to G32, H15, and H18. Right, so I'm just gonna write it down. Okay, A18 to D20, right? F30 to G32, and H15 as well as H18. Right. Okay. So these are the target cells. Okay. So method one. Basically, we are going to use the target.address method, right? So I'm just going to say target.address, like say 00 because I don't want to have the pound sign, right? In an already long code, right? So our target.address 00 equals to A19, right? Or target dot address 00 equals to A20, or A, and then I'm just going to copy this because I don't want to type the whole thing over again, right? So we're gonna change the cell address. Okay, target address dot address. So I'm just gonna say A to D20, right? So this should be B18, B19, or B20. Then I'm just gonna paste it to account for C18, C19, C20. And then once again, I'm going to paste it to account for D18, D19, D20, right? And then we also have the second range, right? That's F30 to G32. So I'm just going to copy this, right? So F30 and right? So we just need 2 here, right? Okay, so F30 or G30, and then I'm gonna paste it again. All right, why am I pasting it over, right? So I have to copy this one, right? So I'm gonna copy, I'm gonna paste it, and then I'm gonna say F31 or G31, and then I'm gonna copy and paste again for F32 or G32, and then we finally have H15 and H18, right? So I'm just gonna say H15 or H18, right? Then what I'm going to say is we're going to call the return for the message box. And what was the name? I think it was call my message, right? And then I'm going to end the if, right? So that's method 1. We're pretty much done with method 1, and we're going to test the code now, right? So if I just do something here, here are the desired selection, right? Sure enough, here are the desired selection, right? Here are the desired selection. So what if we just delete all of them? Okay, it's fine, right? It's working fine, okay? So we don't have to worry about the deletion of cells and highlighting using method 1, right? We don't have to say that how do I ensure that if cells are not deleted or whatsoever, it's not going to trigger the macro, right? We don't have to worry about method 1. Okay, so anytime I make any changes in any of these cells, it's going to trigger the macro. So if I write it here, nothing's going to happen. If I do it here, it's going to trigger the macro. And likewise, anywhere here, it's going to trigger the macro, right? So anything, right? G28, right? G28 should not be, okay, yeah, it's not giving us any value, right? So from here, it's giving us, right? Right, so this is just part of the previous one, right? So it's not going to give us anything, all right? So we are spot on, right? We're spot on. So we have completed method 1. Now we're going to go into method 2, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to highlight this and comment them out, right? So obviously method 1 is far simpler, right? What I'm going to say, if not intersect target dot range, and then I'm going to say A18 to D20, right? So comma, right? I've learned about parsing continuous and non-continuous range previously, right? So no, all right, no, there's no double inverted comma, right? So F30 to G32, and then H15, H18, and then we're just going to close it, another bracket, right? 2 brackets, right? Is nothing, then we're going to call my message, right? So this is a much simpler code, right? So is it going to work exactly the way it should? Well, the answer is no, and I'll explain to you why, right? So it's working fine. It's working fine. It's working fine. But now, when I try to select more than one cell and I'm trying to perform an unwanted operation, basically I'm clearing the content, you see, it's still giving me the result when I don't want that, okay? Because I want to make sure that this worksheet change event is not triggered by the highlighting of cells or, the deletion of cells, because when we delete cells, we tend to delete more than one, right? So that's the reason why when we express it this way, we have to add another command, right? I've explained it to you, right, earlier during the lecture, right? So you can say target.count large or count. It doesn't matter, but I prefer to use this count large, okay? Is greater than 1, then exits up. So what I'm saying here, to account or deletion highlights which with tend to do more than one cell. Okay, so that's what we're actually doing. Okay, so then exits up. Now if I just, okay, we're at the data selection. Okay, and if I clear these now, we're not going to see the pop-up, right? We're not seeing the pop-up anymore, right? Right? So if I clear all of this, we're not seeing anything. So it's the same thing, right? If I highlight it, we're not going to see, okay? So I don't have to prove it to you, but, right? So we're not seeing anything, right? So I'm just going to go back and leave it as its original color, right? Okay, so this is what we need, right? Target.count large greater than 1. So to account for deletions or highlights, which we tend to do for more than one cell, right? So for the first method, we don't need that, right? The second method, we do need it, right? So as you could see, it's a lot simpler to use the second method. The not intersect is nothing, right? But you have to know how to reference continuous and non-continuous range, especially if you're combining with the first row, last row, whatever it is, right? So please go back to my lecture on referencing continuous and non-continuous range if you're not sure, and make sure that you fully understand, okay, how to parse the syntax. All right, guys, let's go through another practice problem together. I wanted to go through this to solidify your understanding of worksheet and workbook events, okay? So the question is pretty simple. Whenever a new value is added to the data set, so I'm on sheet 1, right? We only have a single sheet on this workbook. And there is basically a table, a single column table, right? And it's the headers data set, okay? So we have values underneath it, okay? So whenever a new value is added to the data set, right? New values are being added to the data set. The value should be compared with all the previous entry of the data set. So this value that we're adding to A19 should be compared with all the previous entries in the data set, okay? And return a message that says match if the value exists in the data set, which means if I'm entering a value in A19, and the value happens to have a match with all the previous entry, with any of the previous entry, then it should return a message that says match. Okay, so basically there's a duplicate declaration. So if I'm entering the value of 60 on A19, I know that 60 is already existed in A16, right? So that's a duplicate. So it's going to say there is a match. Okay, and return a message that says no match if there is no match to the entries in the data set. Okay, so which means if I'm inputting a value that does not exist in the previous data set that I have inputted values into it, right? Then it should return a message that says no match. So basically unique value. If I'm having a value like 150, well, 150 is not part of the data set. So it's going to return no match. The message return should be triggered by the worksheet event. Okay. So this is obviously a worksheet change event. Okay. I hope that you have it figured out by now because we're inputting values into the cell, right? So selection change is when you're moving from one cell to another, right? So we're using the change event. And remember when I told you that always write your statement code in the macro inside a module, right, in a procedure, and to call the procedure from the worksheet and workbook events. You never write your code in the workbook or worksheet change events. Okay, what I mean by the code is your statement code. Okay, do not write your statement code in the workbook or worksheet event. Okay, so we'll see. Okay, we'll just go through this now, right? So I'm gonna name a procedure. I'm just gonna call it mine. Okay, just for simplicity's sake. And I'm going to have the L row as long, correct? The reason for L row is because we are going to input values into the L row. So we have to do something with the L row, right? So sheet1.range. So obviously we're going to need the L row and rows.count .n xlr .row. Okay, dim I as long. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, here is I am going to have the value in the last row. Okay, I'm going to have this value compared against the entire data set up to the point of the last row. Okay, so if I'm inputting the value of A19, okay, I'm inputting a value into A19, I'm going to compare all the value from A14 to A18, right, to see if the value has a match or no match to the value up until A18, right? Because A19 is the value that I'm inputting, so I'm going to compare from A14 to A18. So how do we translate that into programmatic terms, right? So I'm going to say is for I equals to 14, because we're starting from 14 here, okay? To, okay, what's the L row, right? If the L row here, right? So you just try to picture it for a second. If I input a value into this, okay, and then I run this macro. When I run the macro, okay, forget about the worksheet or workbook events, okay, don't worry about that, okay, the statement code. Now let's think about a statement code. I'm writing a procedure. Just treat this as a normal procedural question, okay. I'm writing a procedure in a macro, okay, and this is, just assume that it's going to be run by us triggering it, okay, by us going to the Visual Basic application and going here and running the macro, okay. Just assume it to be that way. Don't think about the worksheet change event, okay. So the last row, the L row, is going to be 19, right? So, but we are going to compare 19 from 14 to 18, right? So we're not going from I14 to L row. Actually, we are going from I14 to L row minus 1, okay? Okay, because the L row, we are not going to compare what we have entered to the entire data set, because obviously it's going to return a match, because if I enter 120, and then if I loop through from 14 to 19, the last row, right? Yeah, the last row is 120, so it's going to return a match, because obviously it's going to compare against itself. So we don't want that, okay? We don't want to compare the last row against itself, okay? The last row to compare against itself. Right, so we say L row minus 1, okay? Then I'm going to say if sheet 1 dot range A and L row dot value equals to sheet 1 dot range A and I dot value, then okay, what am I doing here is very simple. I'm going to check if this my value in the last row, so my value is basically the value that I've inputted here, right? And we are looping it from 14 all the way to the L row minus 1. So we're comparing the value that I've inputted here from 14 all the way to the L row minus 1. So if there is a match, so it's looped through, and somewhere along the line, well, it found that the L row has a match with maybe A16, right? From I14 to maybe on this third iteration, there's a value. So what we're going to say is that if there is a match, we're just going to say message box match. And then we know there's a match, we could just exit the sub. Okay, so why am I exiting the sub? I'll explain that to you, right? So then we're going to go next I. Okay, so if there is no match, okay, if there is no match, it's going to go all the way up to the L row minus 1. Okay, and then it's going to see, well, there is no match. So meaning there's no match, right? There's no match. So if there is a match, somewhere along the line, we are exiting the sub, right? So if there is a match, we will exit sub. All right. So basically, anything here, anything written here, will not run, as if there was a match, we would have exited sub, right? So there's no match if this statement runs. So let's remember, if there is a match, it exits the sub. So it loops through, and okay, well, it's found that there's no match. Then it's going to come down here. If there's a match, we exit the sub. So if there is no match, well, I can just say message box no match, and that's about it. Okay, that is basically the statement code. This is the statement code. Now we're going to go to the worksheet event. We're going to go to worksheet, and what's the event that we were interested in? We are interested in the worksheet change event. Okay, so once again, what's the cell address that we're interested? We're interested in the L row, right? We're interested in the last row, right? That's the cell address that we're interested in, because it's an expanding data set, so it's not a fixed set. So I'm just always going to declare my last row as just range. I don't have to put sheet 1 because, well, you don't have to do it in the worksheet event. If the code resides in sheet 1, it's going to take sheet 1, okay, as the reference. So I'm going to say L row A and rows dot count dot n XL up dot row. So this is how we find the last row. Okay. So what I'm going to say, if target dot address. So remember when I told you in the worksheet change event, you always, first thing you concern yourself with is what is the event that you're interested in. The second is what address are you interested in. In this case, I'm interested in the last row. Okay, and the last row is continuously changing. So this macro should be triggered by the last row. Okay, the last row. Okay, target dot address 0, and the last row is A, and rows dot count XL up dot row. Okay, so that's the last row. Target dot address 00 equals to A. And what's the target dot address? A and L row, right? Then what I'm going to say, if target dot address equals to this, A and L row, basically this one, then we don't write our statement code here, right? We don't write our statement code here. We have written our statement code in this module 1, right? So I'm just going to write statement code, okay, right? So this is the module with the statement code. Then I'm just going to say what's the procedure that we're going to call mine, right? Because this was where we wrote the procedure, right? Whereby if we're going to loop through from L row minus 1, no match, okay, if there's match, we exit this up. Otherwise, if there is no match, if there is a match, we'll exit this up. If there is no match, it will bring us to this line. Okay, so that's why I wrote here. Anything written here will not run as if there was a match, we would have exited the sum. Okay, so that's why if it comes down here, there's basically no match, and that is the procedure we are calling. Okay, the procedure or statement code we are calling. Okay, so always remember, never write your statement code in the worksheet or workbook events. Okay, the worksheet and workbook events only intended to identify the particular event you're interested and the address you're targeting. Okay, the address that you're targeting. Now we're pretty much done. So let's try it out, the code. 120 block. Okay. Well, I don't know how could I forget that. Call mine and end if. Okay. I'm going to end the if, and then I'm just going to reset the code and we're going to test it out, right? So I'm just going to have 150. No match. Okay, 150 is no match. I'm just going to align them all because it looks really ugly right now. Okay, so what if I change it to 100? What if I change it to, say, something that has a match, 40? Well, it's returning as match now, right? It's returning as match because 40 is a duplicate declaration, right? So if I insert 60, match. Okay, now if I move to the next row and I insert 100, there's a match because we already have 100 in it, right? So if I put 1000, obviously there's no match. Okay, and then if I move to the next row and I put 45, no match. Okay, and then 60, well, we have a match because it corresponds to the value in A60, right? So you could always add on to the codes, to basically return where the match is found, right? If you really wanted to, you could do that, okay? But I'll just leave it as how it is here, okay? I'm quite content with how the code is, okay? So this is an example of the worksheet and workbook change event and how and why we should always write our statement code in the procedure module and to call it from the worksheet or workbook event. Okay, so that's the general approach to worksheet and workbook events. All right, guys, I will see you in the next lecture whereby we'll be going through input box, VBA input box and Excel input box mainly. Till then, take care.